Log in. Okay, so my name is Feihong Hsu, and all right, so my talk is going to be about scraping from the web, and there's a subtitle here saying this is an overview that does not contain too much cussing. The reason that this subtitle sort of needs to be there is that if you've hung out around people who do a lot of scraping, like the most common line that comes out of their mouths is, "Oh fuck, my scraper just broke." Right? I mean, if you've done any scraping, you've said it, right? Or you thought it, like, very strongly. But I'm gonna try to keep it relatively polite, relatively clean. It could easily go ugly and turn the other direction, but I'll give it my best shot. But also, I guess another valid subtitle for this talk is really like how we scrape stuff at every block. So the organization is pretty simple. First, I feel like I have to sort of define what I mean when I say scraper. And I think my definition may be a little bit controversial to some people. I don't know. Then I will just kind of just go through, iterate through the common types of scrapers that you encounter out in the wild. And then I'll briefly discuss the components of a scraping system. And then I'll dole out pro tips, I guess. And okay, so this is the thing that I don't know, people might disagree with me on. So when I say scraper, I really mean any program that retrieves structured data from the web and then transforms that data so it conforms to another type of structure. But I mean, if you've been programming for a while, you're like, wait, this is just ETL, right? This is extract, transform, load, right? I mean, yeah, technically, well, not technically, actually, yes. But the thing is, I don't really want to call it ETL because in my mind, and I've done ETL, as part of the job, outside of every block. The reason I don't want to call it ETL is because when you say something like ETL, it sounds kind of corporate, kind of stodgy, formal, and it implies, but doesn't say, it implies that there's some sort of rules or expectations involved with what you're doing. And sometimes those rules and expectations are enforced through some kind of contract. But when you do what I call scraping, you're not like asking permission first, right? You're probably not. And even if the other party is giving you the data, there is no like rule that says they have to keep giving you the data or that they won't change the format of data. It's kind of like a free-for-all, right? In the world of scraping that we dealt with at every block. So maybe just for the reasons of connotation, I prefer to call it scraper when other people call it importer or whatever other terms. So I just wasted a lot of time explaining that. Hopefully that made sense. The main types of scrapers, all these types here, and I'll just go through them one by one. I'm not going to go very deep into it for obvious reasons. I can't really show you any source code, so that is a big problem with the talk. So just, I don't know how to make it up to you. Just you can throw tomatoes. So CSV is like the simplest thing. Just import CSV. Most of the time, you want to just use csv.dictreader. There are cases. There's a lot of CSV files out there where the column names are all caps. That's really annoying, so just make them lowercase. Also, there are plenty of CSV data, because if you're dealing with government data like we were, you're dealing with a lot of really dirty data. So even though it's in a structured, it's like a well-defined structured format called CSV, they still find a way to fuck it up. So there's CSV data sets out there that don't have the same number of elements on each row. You have to write special code to deal with it. I think an example of this is the Atlanta crime scraper, or the Atlanta crime data set. So I'm like naming names here. But notice that they're not in the slides. So this is the code that you would use in the case where the column names are like uppercase or weirdly formatted. You can lowercase them or do whatever you want. So there's a tiny bit of street cred in this talk because, look, it's Python. JSON, yeah, that's it. XML, the recommended library that we use is lxml.etree. when it comes to namespaces in XML, if you're scraping, you have no use for them, you should just get rid of them. It just makes everything easier. There are a lot of XML data sets that are structurally very simple, that they're almost flat. When you come across these cases, you should just not even bother dealing with them as XML. Just use like some kind of function that turns all of the elements into dictionaries. So there's, like, for example, this one, right? It's very flat. There's a root element, there's items, and then a bunch of item elements under items element. And so you just run a very like simple function where you iterate through all of the item elements, and then the keys are just like the tag names, and then the values are just the text inside the element. Very simple. So HTML, yeah, so do not ever use URL lib2. Just just don't do it. It's like, it should be like a crime. Use requests, and then obviously, again, LXML, but this time you should use like the submodule lxml.html. Probably a lot of people use PyQuery because that just uses CSS selectors, and pretty much I think any web developer knows CSS. But personally, I've just been sticking with XPath. I guess I'm a traditionalist or whatever, but they're both fine, I think. Also, I'd like to say that I don't think we ever came across this at every block, but in my own personal scraping projects, I come across some very, very funky HTML that even lxml.html cannot handle. In those cases, you want to use HTML5 lib, not beautiful soup. I think HTML5 lib is better, but when you use it as a parser, you can actually still use the etree implementation of LXML. So it's like the best of both worlds, more or less. And also, if you should always explore the page. Sometimes a better way of getting the data you want is to look at the JavaScript. Sometimes there is a chunk of JavaScript embedded in the page that basically contains exactly the information that you want. You could get it from looking at the specific elements and stuff. But if you can find that chunk of JavaScript, just use the JSON module, and it's just easy as pie. So sometimes you actually need a real web browser. This is for the case where it's a web page, and then the content that you want is dynamically generated. Usually when you come across something like this, and it's like a government website, like any government website or data set that uses AJAX is terrible. Like they probably hired some contractors, and they're like, yeah, let's like try out this AJAX shit. And it's like, it's usually so bad that it's probably not even worth doing. But there are cases where you may need it. You really want the data, right? So I'm actually the author of this very well-named library called Punky Browster. But unfortunately, I can't recommend it because there's sort of a new kid on the block. It's called Ghost.py. It basically uses the same underlying technology as Punky Browster, which is Qt's built-in WebKit-based browser. But from what I've seen, it has better API. It supports both PySide and Qt, and also the license is more permissive. So I think mine is GPL, but Ghost.py is MIT. So PDFs, yeah, we had to actually scrape some PDFs, and these. Sorry. Yeah, at first it looked like it was gonna be like the worst fucking thing in the world, but actually scraping PDFs is not quite as bad as it looks. Unfortunately, there are no actual Python libraries that. There are Python libraries that purportedly handle PDFs, and they do, but none of them that I tried can handle all of these wacky government PDFs. So we ended up using PDF to HTML, which actually works pretty well as long as you're using a fairly recent version of the tool. If you're like on Ubuntu, you just do like apt-get, install popular utils, I think. Yeah, but the thing about PDF to HTML is that there's sort of an art to it. Although you want to convert it to XML when you're actually parsing it in your scraper, when you're debugging it, you want to generate HTML instead so that you can inspect it and look at it in the browser. For example, using Firebug. The reason you want to look at it visually is because you have to do what I call like proximity-based sort of grouping. Like you have to group the text cells based on their proximity to each other. You have to find something that's like an anchor. And yeah, I wish I had code or some diagram, but just I'll mime it for you. You need to have some sort of anchor cell where, and it's usually some kind of date element or something that's very well structured that you can just validate. You anchor to that text cell and find all the things that are in the same row or nearly on that same row. And you can, and then like use the column position to try to parse it out and give it structure. Yeah, I don't have a really, yeah, like I said, I don't have an example, but like an example of a PDF data set that we used was the Pittsburgh police blotter. RSS Atom, this is also really simple. Just use feed parser. Unfortunately, feed parser, like it internally uses Beautiful Soup, I believe. And so Beautiful Soup is kind of an aging library. There are some cases where it just sort of fails, especially if the RSS feed contains custom fields. And also there's the really super annoying problem of RSS feeds not being XML, like actually compliant XML. And of course, Beautiful Soup handles that case fairly well, but when you're not using feed parser, it's really annoying. Actually, I'm gonna call out Yelp, because Yelp, surprisingly, doesn't know what they're doing with RSS. And I think Yelp's actually was so bad that I think feed parser actually barfed on it. And I had to like do some weird custom munging. Okay, so database dump. This is pretty rare, but yeah, anything with government data, anything is possible. So we've downloaded like these Microsoft Access files. Obviously, at work, like none of us are using Windows, so it's like, well, what do we do with this? We don't have access. But there is a nice little tool called MB Tools. You can actually use it to somewhat query the data, but you probably should just dump the whole thing out to like text or something. Also, you'll see something like a zip file that's full of CSV files, and each CSV file is a download dump of a different table in their database. And we've dealt with this where we just read everything into a list of dictionaries and try to like do these manual like join-like things, but you should actually just put it in a real database and do actual joins, because it'll save you way more time. Like it's not efficient probably, but like your own time is more important like than the computer's time. So GIS, so these are like KML files and SHP files. These are like for like these mapping applications and stuff. Generally speaking, there are some organizations that provide these sorts of files, but if they do, they always will provide like CSV or some other more popular format. And if they don't, then it's like an asshole organization, and you should just stay away from them. So mixed. So mixed is like any combination of those scraper types, and possibly this is the most common type of scraper. So basically, a very good example is, some government organization, they offer a CSV download, but there's no API, there's no like published URL for getting the file. It's just like on the web page, and the link to that file changes like every single time they release a new file, usually because it's like timestamped or something. And so you have to actually write a little scraper to go to their web page to get the thing. Another example, for example, would be DC Crime. So what they do is, I don't know why they even do it. DC Crime has just become awful lately. They used to be kind of, they're our nation's capital, and they were sort of a leader in like open data, for I guess somewhat obvious reasons. But lately they've just like fallen off the bandwagon. So like DC Crime, they have a page where you specify like what time range you want, and then they split up the download into several parts. And like there are all these like dinky little files, and you have to scrape the page to get each download, and it's awful, and then it's also broken, so you can't even get anything. So all the files you get are empty. So so they're great. So yeah, even if every block were to reopen, like all these people, government people would hate me, and like they would probably block us from scraping them. So I'm kind of burning all my bridges here. Because of Carl. Carl's recording this. They're not even in my slides. At every block, we had like it wasn't like a huge amount of code, but especially in the early days of every block, getting all this data from various sources was a very big part of the site. Later, the site evolved a little bit more in the direction of a platform for neighbor discussions, right? Like a discussion forum. But it was still like a very important part. So we had a pretty large subsystem that was devoted to just grabbing tons of information from the internet. Well, data, not so much information. And so we had some very distinct systems that were part of the system. So for example, obviously the downloader, very obvious. So like the downloader, what it needs to do is needs to keep track of cookies. A lot of the downloader was really just emulating some of the behavior of a browser, because a lot of sites like actually care about like what browser you're using, and a lot of the navigation for these government sites are actually based on cookies. So like the URL, for example, doesn't change. It knows to go to the next page based on the value of the cookie that you have in your thing, which is terrible, but that's just how they work. So yeah, a lot of it is emulating cookies, and I forget some other stuff, maybe some form handling. And there needs to be a caching subsystem. This is very important because a lot of these government servers are running like on like this ancient, Windows 95 computer running IS, I don't know, minus 0.4 or something, and it like can't handle like any sort of load at all. And so like they obviously they have rate limiting, or sometimes they'll look at their logs and be like, what are these dudes doing? Like, why do they need so much data? They don't need all this data. Let's just block their IP. And like, yeah, I think we got an angry phone call or something. Oh no, we didn't get we made an angry phone call to like these New York, this like guy who's doing like some kind of, what was he providing? Like New York liquor licenses, I think. And we found out like his server was just like an old iBook or something. And you could see like the path names like embedded in the file, like it was like a Mac OS like file system path. So yeah, you really need caching. Also, like a lot of these servers are very slow, and so if you've already downloaded it once, you just don't download it again, because when you're testing, you're going to download it over and over again. So you really, really, really need caching, and a proper caching system needs to be able to allow you to. Because you're dealing with so many mixed scrapers, so you're down in HTML at one point, then you're down in JSON, then you're down in XML. You need to be able to separate those out and actually maybe even pretty print the output, so that when you're debugging and you're looking at it, you don't have to like look at like a solid wall of XML, right? Like you can't make sense of that. The human brain can't process it. And then the next part is the raw item, what I call the raw item retriever. So that's just retrieving, splitting up the input data source into like sort of individual units of data. Like for example, in the case of an XML document, like the individual item elements or something, records or whatever you want to call them. And then this is just giving them back in not the raw format, but like the format that's closest to how they came to you, right? And then the existing item detector. So presuming you know what the primary key is, it just tries to detect if you've already loaded that item before, and then if that's the case, then you just update it in your database. You don't actually add a new one. And then the item transformer. Actually, I think I got the order of these wrong, but whatever. So the item transformer obviously turns that raw item into a format where that can be consumed by your system or can be inserted into your database. And then what I call the status reporter. All of these names are terrible. I just made them up. Status reporter, this is actually very important because we found, like if you write 10 scrapers, any given day of the week, one of them is broken. So, obviously we didn't have 10 scrapers. You multiply that by 7. So at any time, like any hour of the day, you probably need to fix like 3 scrapers. And you don't know which 3 unless you're literally keeping track of when the scraper last succeeded, when it added something, when there was last an item appeared in the in their data source. So like we're actually tracking a lot of metadata because there are a lot of implicit failures in the world of scraping. A lot of times the people who are managing these government data sources are not very diligent, I guess, because I guess an example is SF Crime. So, and actually, I like this guy. This guy is a really nice guy. But what happened is they had like a Python script that generates the little zip file that they have that they let you download. And when the year came around, when it became 2013, I noticed that I haven't been getting any data from them for like 2 weeks or something. So it was flagged by our like reporting system. And I finally just emailed him. I always give them a grace period because I know sometimes they are they're busy, something whatever happened, and they're on it. They know about it. And he had no idea, but he was like, oh yeah, it's like this happens every single year. I just need to like change that one hard-coded value in my Python script. So it's like, it's literally like he has to change that year. It's like hard-coded. It's like, and he's like, yeah, it's thanks for reminding me. Can you do it again next year? I was like, sure, yeah. And I said that, but obviously I'm gonna break my promise because I probably won't be scraping San Francisco crime next year, unfortunately. So steps to writing a scraper, I don't really know why this is here. It's just a waste of time. Most of these are obvious, I think. So yeah, find the data source, find the metadata for the data source. So usually there is a separate document, oftentimes there is, that details like what each data source is and certain, maybe useful tidbits. And actually verify the primary key is the thing that sometimes even we forgot to do. Like you have to, so like a key that looks like the primary key often is not the primary key. You have to download the whole set of data that you're comfortable dealing with, and then literally like, I write a Python script that that has like a set and it loops through all of the records and sees if any of the primary keys, so-called primary keys, repeat. Because yeah, they don't tell you what the primary key is, or the thing that looks like it is totally not. And then obviously you have to write the scraper itself, debug the scraper. When I say debug, I mean I guess really test it, like test it with the actual live data and see like you always need to eyeball the output because it's almost never the case you got it right the first time. There's always some weird exceptions because the structure of the data is usually not that apparent. There's no schema that you can look at. It's just like the structure is whatever is defined by like the data, like how it's presented to you. And then obviously the last step is to fix the scraper, which you will repeat infinity times. it will, yeah. So here I'm going to pimp this one very useful program called Firefinder. Has anyone even heard of Firefinder? I find that this is like this crazy secret that is amazingly useful yet no one knows about. So Firefinder is essentially an extension for Firebug. And what it does is allows you to test your CSS and XPath expressions right in the browser, and it will visually show them to you. So sounds super useful. I will show you exactly how useful it is, but not in this presentation. I will go to the browser itself. All right, so, oh crap, it's so small. All right, I'm going to put down the mic very briefly. Okay, I think everything is on the screen. So yeah, you start Firebug. And yeah, so obviously you have to be using Firefox to use it, but I mean, I don't know, I think Firefox is pretty great. So yeah, so for example, I did a search for all list items under the nav element, and then, yeah, I should have just, yeah, I'll just type it again. Actually, maybe I'll do something else. I'll do a P. Okay, so all of the P elements, all the paragraph elements, and it just highlights them. And then they also appear on the list below. So if you want to look at any of them in detail, you collapse them to see the stuff in them. But if you want the real detail, you can go to inspect, and they'll go right into the Firebug inspector, and you can look at it. So I guess a slightly more interesting query would be, the one that I had there. So if you want to get all the nav items, so oftentimes the nav items are what you want to get because they're the ones that let you get to like the next page or next part of something that you want to get to. Yeah, so it's highlighted all of them, even the ones that were hidden initially. So this is obviously only useful for HTML scrapers, but for that particular purpose, it is like I'm in that thing all the time when I'm writing scrapers. Okay, so storing scraped data. So if you've seen like, actually Adrian Holovati, the founder of Everyblock, he has a very nice talk that he gave in PyCon about how Everyblock stored all of its all of its scraped data. We didn't make tables for all of our different news types. We actually had this system where it was in a relational database, but everything was kind of meta. Like there was a so-called schema table and then schema fields. This is all in the talk itself. So like basically the moral of the story is like don't create tables because you don't. I mean you can create tables if you know exactly how you're using the data, but until then just don't bother. You maybe store in like ZODB, right? The original Python object relational database or some other non-rel database. And design patterns. So this is really not exciting. Like everyone, you could think this up in your sleep. Yeah, use lookups instead of like storing the actual value. And this one is maybe less obvious, using a scraper superclass. So when I was writing my own scrapers, I prefer to use functions. Like functions, they're simple. But we have like this somewhat large, it's not extremely large, scraper superclass that handles a lot of the common scraper logic. And the thing is, you end up, if you write a lot of scrapers, you end up using the same stuff over and over again. So just put them in your superclass and then, subclass that, and then you don't have to write nearly as much code. So you should try it out. And also, yeah, the superclass obviously incorporated all of that sort of extra stuff that actually does take a little while to figure out, like the caching subsystem, the reporting subsystem. Those tend to take a lot of code, but they're pretty much always going to be the same for every scraper. So yeah, so some specific tips for working with government data. Funny enough, sometimes like when government employees they take the day, when they go home, they literally shut everything down apparently. Like you just can't get data like in the middle of the night. And of course, we run most of our scrapers starting from like midnight or something, or 1 a.m. or something, because that's when the traffic is the lowest, right? We're not competing with other people downloading their stuff. But for example, with the Dallas crime data set, it's never available at night. I don't know if they turn it off or like, I don't know what it is, but we have to schedule it for like the middle of the day. And then I've mentioned this before, but yeah, a lot of sites practice some kind of rate limiting. They might block your IP if you've been hitting them too hard. And by like hitting them too hard, I mean like 5 times a minute or something. Like they really can't like suffer any sort of load at all. Let's see. Yes, and the thing, if you're scraping from a web page, especially from a web page, but even from like an API, you should be very careful about using that data to try to analyze trends, like make a graph, or like come to some kind of conclusion about something, because, like I said, that data is from the beginning, it tends to be a little bit dirty. We have to get some munging to get it into usable form in the first place. And also, for example, Chicago crime. I think, well, so Chicago crime, for instance, doesn't give you every crime that happens in Chicago within a given time span. They will leave out certain crimes like sexual crimes, to protect the privacy of the victim, and maybe some other stuff too. You really don't know. Like their disclaimer is very explicit about this. Like there will be holes in the data, and also we frequently notice that old data items are updated, presumably because when they were originally entered, there were mistakes, right? So be very careful. And then maybe one of the most useful items of advice is that when you're just stuck, like you don't know what you're doing, which is like very easy to get in this position because there's often no documentation, or the documentation is is just like not helpful at all, or is like completely wrong, just pick up the phone and try to call someone. And if you can actually reach an actual person, which admittedly it takes some effort, but if you do, like never throw away their phone number, because you want to keep that info, because you will, not like if your scraper breaks again, but when your scraper breaks again, you want to just be able to like, not necessarily call them, like it's better to just email them. Like email them, like, be like, hey, what's going on? And it's so helpful to have a good relationship with, you know, the government employees that are in charge of the data. Yeah, and we had for example, we had a great relationship with, I think Brett Goldstein's his name. He's like the CIO, not CTO, I think CIO of the, you know, city of Chicago, and he was very helpful. So, and then here's some assorted pro tips, right? So, I don't know that anyone's gonna ever run into this, but like if you have to detect what encoding the content it is in, normally you would use Chardet, but I guess Mark Pilgrim is the guy who developed it, and I don't know if you know anything about him, but apparently he disappeared from the internet, right? Or did he reappear at some point? I don't know. Like, but he's not like updating his stuff anymore, so don't use his shit. You should use Charade, which is like a port, which is technically just a port, but apparently it just works better because it's up to date. And then obviously clean any HTML that you want to display to any end user, because you don't know what kind of stuff might be in it. And lxml.html.clean is a good module to use for that. And also, if you find a data set that looks nice but doesn't allow you to filter it by date, it's kind of a lost cause, right? Because the only way you can find new updates is to scrape the entire thing, which is going to take like hours, days, or weeks, because it's on an IIS server, right? Like it's not going to be fast. But if you care about historical data, I guess you might bear with it and just do that. Also, so like I said, scrapers, our scrapers and like all this data that we pulled in were an extremely huge part of every block in the early days. But as the site evolved, we had this situation where like stuff was just breaking every minute or something, and we were never like a very large development team. At most, we had like 3 developers at any given time, and so we were just like, hey, you know, if we'll just let it break. If someone complains, maybe we'll fix it, right? We'll consider it, you know, but probably more than one person. Like, I remember I got a lot of. So the thing that really bugged me about SF was police calls, because police calls are like they're calls to the police. It's that's all the data set is. They're not actual crimes. They're things that people call the police about. And so like there's just random stuff like, oh, there's a drunk in the street, or like there's a pigeon that pooped on the sidewalk. Like people will call police about anything. And so I was like, this data set is just junk. I mean, why do people want this? So like one day it broke, of course, and I was like, I'm not gonna fix this. It's just, and there's so much of it coming, because people are calling the police all the time about all sorts of weird stuff. But then I kept getting all these complaints, like usually from this user called Frugal Granny. And she's gonna hate me, I guess, if she sees this talk, but she won't see this talk. And she was like, bring back my police calls. And I emailed her back. I was like, why do you like these? You know that we actually have a crime data set with like lists of actual crimes. These are not crimes. She's like, I just want to know what's going on in my neighborhood. Because she's a frugal granny, I don't know. So, so yeah, I brought back police calls because apparently the users demanded it. And I'm done. Are there any questions? Any questions? Oh, Rob?
So did every block track, when you talked about them going back and sheet police reports?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you keep a database of the changes? Because that would be interesting.
Yeah, so we would do the past, I think past 180 days, so the past 6 months. So if they were to update it within that time period, like 6 months after the original crime was entered into the system, we would update it to reflect the real value. But the thing is, by that time, like people pay attention to like recent crimes, so we didn't bother to go back all the way like 3 years and stuff. Like they might make changes to stuff that's that long ago. You don't know, but yeah, basically yes.
Is there a way to do a query to find just the reports that were changed?
No, they will not give you that. Yeah, I mean, if you develop a very, very good relationship with City Hall, like chocolates, mistresses.
Every block could track that.
Oh, well, yes, we could. We could, but crime data, though, is like the largest data set of, other than police calls. Obviously, police calls are more, right? Because they include actual crimes and non-crimes. But the crime data sets are usually huge, like gigabytes, and downloading all of that history is foolish. Yes?
When you guys used to do reporting on the script, when it failed or couldn't speed it, what do you use to track that?
Oh, nothing special. I mean, we just made it like a table. Yeah, it was just homegrown. Like, you only need to keep track of a few things, and then it was just it wasn't like it was sent as emails that were broken. It would just look at the report like a web page. And then the web page, inside of that web page, inside the view, it would do a bunch of queries to see everything that looked broken. Yeah, because it was based on heuristics. Not missing data, it was based on heuristics. So we didn't know the data set was broken. A lot of times what was happening was our code itself wasn't broken, but it was stuff on their end was broken. So if there's too long an absence or something looked a little fishy, our code would just put that in the report. So, yes?
So do the scraping tools try and wait up to figure out what sort of tool they were using when they made the page? Because I remember like Microsoft front page makes these horrible pages.
Oh.
If you knew that, it would give you advantage scraping.
It might, but it's kind of like the point I was making about if you see like a government website using like all these Ajax-y things, it's like, it's just a total mess, and unless you like, unless your cat is gonna die, unless you get this data, you probably don't need the data that bad. Yeah. We did a lot of investigation. Like, what I got really good at was I would sort of reconnoiter or something. I would look carefully at the scraper, at a particular data set to see what it offered, how easy it was to scrape, and stuff. And a lot of times, like, my assessment was hell no. So we passed up a lot of data. That was technically possible, but just not fun. Yeah.
Did anyone ever try to get people in conversation where, if you did this a little differently, like use your data?
Oh, I forgot to repeat the questions. So your question was, did I ever what?
Did you ever get a situation, you or whoever leadership of their block where try to persuade people to present their data in a different way so that they can use it?
It's a very good question. So the question is, were we ever in a position where we could try to convince people to present their data in a way that makes it easier for us to scrape? And the answer is yes. So if you do manage to establish a good relationship with some city official or something, city worker, sometimes you can, persuade them to add another field for you. I think the example of this was Chicago Food Inspection. So initially, they did not give us a primary key, and so we were using like a combination. We did a composite key where it was the date and the license ID and some other stuff, but it was not perfect because some stuff got left out. But we were like, hey, could you just put in, like, you probably have a primary key, could you just add it to the data set? And they're like, sure. And it took a little while, but they did it, and it made me feel pretty good. Yeah, but most of the time, I'll sort of ask, and they'll be like, no. And sometimes, the thing is, I can understand when they say no, but there were a few times when they were like, It's like the short answer. I remember this guy. He was like, the short answer is no. The long answer is, and then he like I don't know. He said like no 64 times or something. I don't know. It was really that guy. Yeah, that guy was a dick. Yes.
It's kind of piggybacking off of that question. So I understand like the rant and talk about government organizations, and that's fine. Is there anybody who got it right that had like a really nice API that was well documented and developer friendly?
Dang.
Just calling people out.
Okay, so the question was there any instance where like a government organization just got it right and gave you a really nice API and like documented it really well? And this is like the toughest question I've had. I'll get back to you on that. Like I don't know. Okay, so there is an organization that stands out. They're not exactly governmental. There's a company called Socrata. I think they're based in Seattle, Washington. And actually, they are the software that they produce is the software that is used for the Chicago data portal, also used for the Seattle one, some other cities, I'm sure. And they're pretty nice, but the problem, like the way they implemented stuff, like you can choose various data formats, you can have CSV, XML, blah, 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 JSON. And I think a lot of what they do is pretty nice, and it's somewhat uniform so that, Austin's another city that uses their stuff. So like you can take your scraper code that you used on a different city and then use it again, the same code, on a different data set. But the problem with them is that they're still missing the one part. Their documentation is awful, like just beyond awful. But again, I'll sort of give them sort of a backhanded compliment, which is like, if you complain and you can get in touch with like a support engineer or something, they're actually pretty helpful. It's just like, why don't they just save money by actually writing documentation? Well, whatever. So I think they're the closest that I can get to saying yes to that. Yes.
So actually, I gotta say, I actually use the site like every day in the morning. It's actually kind of cool because like, I get all the photos of things, and then someone like, I found a friend in the photos who was like, visited my neighborhood to tell me, and then I was able to give them what for about it. Yeah. So anyway, besides school, is there any talk about like making it, will it live in any way, and like, are they talking about sourcing it, or is it like,
okay, so the question was, the site is really cool, it's the best site ever, paraphrasing. And the question was actually, are there any plans to open source it, or is there a way that Everyblock will continue to live in some way? And I don't know how many people know this, but Everyblock was started via this Knight Ridder Foundation, Knight something, whatever. I should know this. Knight Foundation, it's like a journalism kind of effort. And they had this thing where they give you a grant. I think Everyblock's initial grant was like $1.1 million, something like that. 1.9? Yeah, right. I really should know this. But so apparently it was 1.9. And so part of the terms of that grant was that they had to open source the code. And so that code became OpenBlock. And so it is out there. I forget if it's in a Git repository, or if it's an SVN or something, but it is actually out there. That code consists of like the core of what Everyblock is. Although I came onto Everyblock, I've only worked at Everyblock for a year and a few months. So obviously I was not part of the effort team that produced that piece of the code. And then in the three years since they open sourced it, obviously they were required by MSNBC, which became NBC News or whatever. It gets kind of complicated. And there are efforts actually underway to try to open source the current code, but there's a decent amount of the code already out there. So yes, to some extent, but the final word on that, I don't really know.
Is
You were right. It was 1.1.
Oh, it was 1.1. Oh, okay. All right. So I did know it.
The scrapers are the part that's not open source.
Yes, I think not entirely true. I think there was something there, but the scraping system that we have now is not the same as the one that was in that source code. And there are probably a lot of scrapers too that maybe individual scrapers that are missing. Although the ones that are missing are probably ones that are dead anyway, like they're not maintained anymore. But yeah, I personally really would like that part of it to be open source. I don't think, some of that code was quite old and kind of decrepit, but the ideas behind it were pretty good. It came from many years of experience of doing that sort of work. But I mean, it can be rebuilt. It actually was not like a ton of code. The stuff that was very large, and now I'm like answering all these every block questions that I maybe shouldn't. So maybe like Carl will just like censor or like bleep, I don't know. The code that I think is most interesting is actually the stuff that doesn't scrape the structured sources, but like we had our media mentions part of the website, where it was just looking at articles. There's no structure to them, and like picking out addresses from them and putting them on the website. That stuff I think took like that would take a little bit more work to recreate. But the stuff that I talked about in this talk, I think would not take too much effort. Obviously, I cannot write it because I'm like tainted, sort of, and I still work for them. So someone else gets work. Yeah. I guess the question. What's the question? I don't know. Oh.
The scrapers are not open. Everything is open source.
Yeah, everything is open source, but the scraper stuff, the current scraper stuff, is not open sourced. Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen.
Last question.
Yes, Caesar.
Did you get severance or?
I'm not going to repeat that question. The answer is yes, and well, no. So I haven't gotten it yet. That's the answer. That's why I can't be too blabbermouthed. Yeah.
Your hopes are high.
Yeah.
Hey, now it's really cheap. We want to good question.
I want to usurp Brian's role as Chippy Master. No, I don't know. I don't really know. Obviously, I'm still engaged until the end of the month, and then PyCon is just around the corner, and then anything. Yeah. I mean, I definitely should go to PyCon. I think PyCon this year. And you know, PyCon, it's like crazy stuff happens. You might run into some crazy people, and they'll give you a crazy job. Yeah.